Susan Hood is the award-winning author of many picture books for young readers, including The Last Straw, Kids vs. Plastics, Ada's Violin, and Shaking Things Up, 14 Young Women Who Changed the World. In 2018, she wrote her first middle grade novel in verse, Lifeboat 12, followed by Alias Anna this year. Next year, we can look forward to her newest middle grade novel in verse, Harboring Hope, the true story of how Henry Sinding helped Denmark's Jews escape the Nazis. Greg Dawson has been a journalist for over 50 years, winning awards for his work as a TV critic, columnist, and feature writer at magazines and newspapers, including the Boston Herald, Indianapolis Star, and Orlando Sentinel. He is the author of Hiding in the Spotlight, the adult version of his mother, Jana's true story of escaping the Nazis, from which Alias Anna is adapted. He is also the author of another book on the Holocaust, Judgment Before Nuremberg, and co-author of Busted in Bloomington, a collective memoir of the 60s written with his wife, Candy Dawson. Aimée Dawson, who will moderate tonight's event, is Jana's granddaughter and the girl who started the germ of the idea for Alias Anna with her middle school project more than 30 years ago. Is that about right? Sorry, not to put you on the spot.
But who's telling?
And also, interestingly, she is the narrator for the audiobook of Alias Anna. So please join me in welcoming Susan, Greg, and Aimée to talk about this incredible collaboration.
Thank you, Margaret. Good evening, everybody. Margaret and everyone at Politics and Prose, thank you for opening your distinguished doors for this discussion tonight. I think it's not lost on anybody in here what importance this bookstore has played in the pursuit of ideas and creativity and this kind of dialogue and truth like we're going to have tonight. So we really are honored to be here. Thank you all. We are really excited, the three of us, to be here tonight. We've never shared a stage together. This is our first event as a trio talking about Jana's story and also the artfulness that has gone into the way that we're telling it through various forms. So we're really excited to be here. As moderator and panelist, I will tell you my moderator hat on. We're hoping to do about 30 minutes of a presentation and then open it up for Q&A and to dialogue with you all. We'd really like to hear what's on your mind. I'm gonna steal something Susan was saying earlier. Some people are always worried that they haven't read the book and they come here. That's okay. So we actually expect that you haven't. This is just to whet your appetite. So don't worry about the kind of questions or discussion you'd like to have when we open that up. So I think in the spirit of hoping that we have enough brevity to open up for Q&A, I'm gonna get started and move to our next slide. Okay, so Greg, Dad, and Susan, you know, this is interesting. So Dad, Hiding in the Spotlight came out in 2009, which now feels like a long time ago in so many different epochs. And it's the first documentation of my grandmother Jana's story, your mom. And book came out, and Susan has been a prolific children's book, picture book author for many, many years, and has spent her time now working on award-winning novels for middle grade age students. And so how on earth did this collaboration happen that many years after Hiding in the Spotlight came out, and also the kind of work that you do, Susan? So how would you like to?
So are there any other authors in the group here? Just because if you're an author, you may know that as you're working on one project, you often find your next project doing the research. So I was working on Lifeboat 12, which is a World War II story about kids who were evacuated to Canada during the Blitz. And I was reading a lot of World War II books. And Greg's book stuck with me. It's about two young girls who are ages 12 and 14. And as the mother of daughters and the grandmother of two little granddaughters, I'm always drawn to stories of amazing girls. So I went about my business and continued with Lifeboat 12, and Zhanna and Frina stayed with me, and I could not shake them. I was like, oh my gosh, this has got to be a children's book, because these are middle grade kids it's a part of the Holocaust that most people don't know about. And you start studying the Holocaust often in 8th grade. And this event is very underreported event in Ukraine, underreported place. And I just thought, this has got to be a kid's book. So I got up my courage to contact Greg, a total stranger, said, I'd love to do a children's book about this. What do you think? And I sent him some of my books, and he wrote back and he said, oh, I'd love to talk more. So he lives in Florida. I live in Connecticut. And I think I was asked to speak at the University of Florida. And I said, aha, I could go there and I could visit Greg. So we went out to lunch with Candy and my husband, and we talked for a little bit. They invited us back to their apartment to show us the movie you're going to see. And we were talking. I thought, okay, we've taken up enough of your time. We need to go. I thought it had been about 2 hours. It had been 5 hours. And obviously, we're both really interested in doing this. So that's how that all happened.
So Susan's given you kind of the backstory there. You can tell that when she found me much less frightening than she feared she would.
True.
You know, no, and so we had a wonderful lunch together and a conversation. Gave her more background on the story, showed her a lot of pictures and so on, and so at that point, after the Hiding the Spotlight came out, and I did my other book related to it on spinoff. I thought I was kind of done with the story. Now Candy, sitting here with us tonight, right there, has written a play based on the book that's been produced in a few states, and wrote a screenplay which has been optioned a couple of times. Like most optioned screenplays, they don't get produced in Hollywood because you can't find the money for them. But we had pretty much thought we were at the end of the writing life of this story until we got this call out of the blue from Susan. We sat down, and she looked very impressed by her background, the other books she had done. And my feeling was, Candy and our feeling after speaking with Susan, was that, you know, one of the primary goals of doing the book originally, Hiding in the Spotlight, was to tell the story and get it out there. As Susan said, this part of the Holocaust is really very little known. Even today in this country, overwhelmingly, the narrative that we're familiar with in this country is, for lots of understandable reasons, is the Auschwitz and Frank narrative, which is an invaluable thing, but it's really not even the beginning of the story. What happened in Ukraine was really sort of the Pearl Harbor of the Holocaust. That it began in the Soviet Union, mostly in Ukraine, and that's where my mother's story is. That's where it started. So my feeling all along is to tell the story to as many people as possible. And I could see clearly after looking at Susan's other work and speaking with her that this is a wonderful opportunity to spread the story even further, because what she does is quite unique, and that what she did ultimately produce was a book that really is equally enjoyable by any age, whether it's 10 or 100, but has a special, I think, appeal to younger audiences because it's done in this wonderful verse with fantastic graphics and a lot of white space on the pages, which made it particularly accessible for that audience. And let's face it, that is the audience, if they learn about this story, that's going to pass on the story to their children and their grandchildren, which is kind of the point of so much Holocaust literature, is to make sure this sort of thing does not happen again. And so for us, it was like a no-brainer. Absolutely, let's do this. And I sat back and let Susan do it. and I did what I could to not get in the way and to help. So this is a golden opportunity for us.
And so we're going to hear actually a little bit more later about why exactly Susan did choose to do this for youth and the approach to verse. So thank you for that. And I have to say, Susan, that's the most voracious pursuit of my father's time I've ever heard anyone in their life put forward, which I think was great. Thank you for finding him, and Dad, thank you for listening to Susan's. So thank you for that. Dad, next thing that's coming up here is, and I'm going to go back for a second, the movie, 5 minutes of a film. We're going to set up the story and show you guys a little bit more about Jana and Ukraine and the story itself. So you want to set up?
Yes, and it's my pleasure to now introduce a film, part of a film, a short version of a film that Candy made after we visited Ukraine in 2006. First time I had been there. We went there to do some research and to go to the place where my mother had lived, to walk those same streets, to meet some of the people who are still there, who knew her. She had no direct family still there, but she had friends. Her extended family ended up in Israel after the war. But we went there to do research, and this movie that Candy made, she made a documentary that was chosen for Film Festival in Orlando. It was 18 minutes long, right, Candy? And that this is a 5-minute version for the purposes of our presentation here tonight. This is a 5-minute version of that film that we've shown that when we do presentations, it's always a part of our presentation and far more popular than my part of the presentation usually. So with that said, here is
We're opening the doors to a story hidden for 60 years. This little Jewish girl, Zhanna has finally told her story. She was born in Ukraine, on the Sea of Azov, in the little fishing village of Bryansk. Her son Greg went back to walk in her footsteps. Greg found the conservatory in the city of Kharkiv, where his mother and her younger sister Frina had studied. Then he found their home, 48 Katsarskaya Street. It was behind these doors that his mother and her family had lived, a family that Greg would never know. When the Nazis came calling, only Jana and Frina escaped. Greg found the memorial outside the city to the 16,000 Jews of Kharkiv who were told they were going to a labor camp. It was bitterly cold. Dmitry Arshansky had a plan. He turned to a Ukrainian collaborator on the march and said, "Look at me, I'm not a Jew. Turn your head. Let my daughter go. I have something in my pocket to give you. Here, just take it and turn your head." Jana jumped out of line, and the rest of the family marched on to Dobritsky Yar. When Greg found the site of the ravine itself, he placed flowers in honor of his family who died and all the 16,000 who perished. He knew what happened there.
Oh my gosh. Ah, there they are.
А что, очень двое людей живые, которые тут написано, они
There they
живые.
are.
Мать и тетя.
Jana and Frina.
Они видно в списке.
And here are Dmitry and Sarah. Dmitry and Sarah.
Это все
And
исправимо. Интересно.
The Bagancha family in the city of Kharkiv sheltered the girls for 2 weeks. This is Nikolai, Jana's classmate, and today his widow lives in that home and opened that gate once more.
Come on in.
The Baganchas couldn't hide the girls any longer, sent them on their way with new non-Jewish identities. But Jana couldn't hide her talent. At an orphanage, occupying Nazi soldiers heard her play and brought her into the city to perform for them. Jana had to remember her father's parting words, "I don't care what you do, just stay alive." You see her here in the middle of this picture with her head turned, trying to hide her identity. It was the beginning of hiding in the spotlight. Zhanna and Frina performed for the Nazis and Ostworkers throughout the war. Jana told the truth that she was a Jew, just like the others in the camps. to Larry Dawson. He helped her and Frina get on the first ship to the United States, and Zhanna and Frina got scholarships to the Juilliard. But there was one more lie that she was hiding, the false birthday from all those years ago.
This is the first time ever since the war started that I could say that my birthday is on April 1st instead of the 25th of December, and I was 80 years old then.
And this is the first time we've ever celebrated her real birthday, April 1st. Wonderful. This is a new birthday celebration, but you're going to have to choose between April 1st and December 25th. You're not going to get double birthdays and double
Are
birthdays.
you sure that I can swing it?
I'm sure. Maybe for 1 year. You get 1 year of double birthdays, and then next year you have to choose.
Maybe I'll become a swindler and swing it.
This year you get double. Next year it's one or the other.
There'd be a long explanation.
Built only in around 2000, after the year 2000, and it was built based on the names that the organizers of the memorial spoke to the Christian non-Jewish residents of Kharkiv, where they were from, and asked if they could help identify the Jews who were taken off to the killing field. This killing field, you saw, it was Drobitsky Yar. Many of you probably are familiar with the name Babi Yar, which is the most famous killing field in Ukraine, where 34,000 Jews were massacred in 1941. Yar is the Russian word for ditch or ravine. The one outside my mother's town, there were 16,000 Jews who died there. It was presumed that none of the Jews on the death march had escaped, and so that's why their names were offered up with their parents' and grandparents' names as victims. And so the organizing committee put their names on that memorial because they were presumed dead, as it was anybody on that death tour, so death march. So that's why their names are there. And for me, of course, to see my name there on the wall was kind of a chilling thing, because it was like seeing my own epitaph, to see that my mother was dead, and so here I was. So yes, as my mother said at the end of her interview there, she said that yes, it would be a very long explanation as to what happened. Yes, long enough for a book. So that's what ultimately led to the book. And
it was also always a little bit of a joke as a kid for my Jewish grandmother to have her birthday on December 25th, the most Christian of holidays. And in fact, that was by design for the hiding in the concept of becoming a Christian orphan. She picked...
I have to correct you on that.
Oh.
I asked my mother when I found out, I only was 30 years old when I found out that my mother's real birthday was not the one I'd celebrated all my life, which is Christmas Day. It was always a headache, Christmas present, birthday present. So when she told me in one of our conversations, actually around when I first decided, after deciding to do the book, she said, it was not like an, oh, by the way thing. Oh, by the way, did I tell you that my real birthday is really not December 25th? I said, hello? I said, I think I would have remembered that. You telling me your birthday was not December 25th? And she said, no. I said, well, what is it? And she said, well, it's April 1st. And I said, come on, give me a break. April 1st? Come on, not really. And she said, no, it's really April 1st. She's so proud of that because it's the same birthday as her musical hero, Rachmaninoff. But I said, okay. And the reason she changed her birthday was she was creating a completely new identity. And she had to, part of that was a different birthday. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, you obviously chose Christmas Day because you wanted the ultimate masquerade, for example, right? Because it was this most Christian holiday. And she said, no, I didn't even think about that. She said December 25th in the Soviet Union was just another day.
This just goes to show you, I believe.
So she said it was just random.
Sarcasm.
So it was just random that she chose December 25th. As it turned out, what a great masquerade.
Yeah.
So there's.
Nevertheless, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You pulled the wool over my eyes until right now. I thought they had come up with that because it was this most Christian day. So we all keep learning these
It's a
things.
father's
so.
job.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, he's good at it. Yeah. So you want to continue, Dad? You're still talking a little bit about
How am I on
the war.
time? I don't want to mess up your
okay.
game plan.
You're okay. Keep going. Yeah.
Okay.
You can talk a little
Let's
bit
see.
about the just the experience. We can go to Doritsky Yar.
Yes, well, yes. Gosh, when I started, what I encountered in Ukraine was this whole body of history that I was unfamiliar with, and I came later after the book was published, and I started doing events, all sorts of them, from grade schools to middle schools to universities to Holocaust museums. I found that to a degree that just amazed me, because I was not a Holocaust scholar by any means, or much of a student of any kind. I thought, well, maybe it's just me. But what I found was with a pretty universal lack of knowledge about this part of the Holocaust. My mother's own story, personal story of escape, is remarkable in itself, but equally remarkable is the history it helps illuminate of the Holocaust in Ukraine, which was in fact the first part. The first million Jews who died in the Holocaust actually died in the Soviet Union, mostly in Ukraine. And so this is something that's been marginalized and overlooked, not for conspiratorial reasons, but all sorts of complicated reasons of circumstance, but that have left this chapter pretty dark. And so just now, meaning in the last 10, 15 years or so, and especially now, sadly enough, because of the prominence of Ukraine in the news, there's more attention, more awareness of Ukraine, more of an interest in knowing the history of Ukraine, and people are discovering, not to the extent I wish, but I think there will be more, how important Ukraine was, how central to the history of the Holocaust. So that's going to change over time as more books and more academic study is done. So I tried to do two things in this book: to tell her remarkable personal story, which is so unlike all other most of the other Holocaust stories I know, because almost all the other Holocaust stories, the most famous ones we know, have one thing in common: confinement in an attic, in a basement, in a forest, in some kind of a hiding place where they're captive to their circumstances. And my mother and her sister were never captive in that respect. They were captives of the Germans, who held them as captives but as performers, but they were constantly moving across Europe the entire time, the whole 5 years, from venue to venue. And even at one point they ended up in Berlin in 1943, just after the Allies had started bombing Berlin, and they were just allowed to wander around Berlin because the Germans presumed they weren't going to go anywhere. So they were walking down the Alexanderplatz, in Berlin, past the Führer's underground bunkers and things like that. So it was a remarkable story, and very unlike most other stories that we're familiar with, that I grew up with in the 50s and 60s.
And so when you were talking about your research process, and so much of this has been unknown. Was there anything else you wanted to speak about that went into the research that you did to get to the truth of her story? Anything else?
Well, briefly, I did, I don't know, 10, 20 hours of interviews with her after we decided to do the book. And so I'm a journalist by training, so I let her talk, and then with some questions. And then afterwards, I went back, had a transcript made of the interviews, and I went back to test her memory, because she's a woman of great certitude. And so I wanted to find out if the things she was telling me with such great certainty were actually true. So I started picking out particular facts, what she said were facts and instances, and I went back to real academic scholarship, the real Holocaust scholars, and I tried to find if I could corroborate dates and things of that. And to a remarkable degree, she was absolutely accurate. she even remembered, amazingly, when she and her sister were taken by the retreating Nazis, retreating from Ukraine, took them with them when they were retreating, and to Berlin. I said, well, when did you get there? She said, well, I think it was in November of 43. And I remember because they had just started bombing Berlin. And I went back and I checked, and son of a gun, if that's exactly when the Germans started bombing Berlin, is in early November 1943. There are other instances like that I checked, and I found that she was quite accurate. And of course, there were things she didn't know at the time. And when I went and looked at the history, I found there was a great more context and detail and corroborating sort of evidence that showed that she was quite right in her memory.
So how did this story even become known? You said you didn't know about her birthday, so how did you learn about the story?
Well,
somebody here might know about that.
Yeah. Well, no, that part comes later. Actually, the first part, very briefly, because I want to. We okay on time? Okay. Very briefly, the reason I found out about it at age 30, I knew nothing about this story until I was 30. I grew up in the Midwest, in a university town in Bloomington, Indiana. We were a non-religious family, didn't go to church or anything, or synagogue. And so I grew up in a secular home. I knew nothing about this story. I knew my mother was Russian, of course, and she spoke Russian to me as a child. So that was no secret. But all I knew was that she had come over to this country after the war. That's really all I knew. So fast forward to 1978, when I'm working at the newspaper in Bloomington as a columnist, always looking for an idea, scraping for an idea. And at the time, some of you may be old enough, most of you are not, to remember that in 1978, NBC had a mini series called Holocaust that ran for 3 nights, 9 hours. It was a very, very big deal for a lot of reasons. And so I looked at that and I thought, geez, maybe there's a column in here for me somehow, maybe some idea. So I called my mother, who by then was living in Milwaukee, and I said, of course, she doesn't watch TV. She was not aware of this miniseries, even though it was getting lots and lots of publicity. And I told her about it. And I said, listen, I just wonder if you had any experiences during the war before you came here that sort of might be relevant to this story. And boy, did she. And then for the next hour or two, she gave me the broad outlines of her story. And I was typing as fast as I could. And that was my first time I knew anything about what happened to her. And so I got a column out of it that ran during the miniseries and after that, people started encouraging me to do a book, and I deflected that because I didn't see myself as a book writer, and she didn't want to talk about it anymore again. That was just for that one interview. She said, "Okay, I'll talk to you about this, but not again." And so so I let it go. And if you fast forward 16 more years to 1994, and Candy, by the way, had encouraged me to do the book too, and I deflected it. And so fast forward to 1994, when
I was 13 years old in eighth grade, and certainly I wish I could say that I wrote a letter to my grandmother on my own sort of interest, but it was a school project, because usually this kind of stuff has to be encouraged. And I wrote a very innocent letter asking her to tell me a little bit about her life at the same age. And silently, my parents they've told me now, we're saying, well, good luck with that, because she's not going to share. She's done with this story. She's not going to tell us anything more than what we know. And very surprising to all of us, I got a thick letter back, this dense blue paper with her artful, intense handwriting. Her handwriting was as intimidating as she was. And I was like, oh my God. And we all realized that we were sitting on a treasure. People have asked me if why she wrote to me, and like, why did she decide to do that? And I really believe it was more about why she decided to write it then. I think she was ready. I think the time was right. She was getting older. I was another generation that didn't know this history. I actually think that maybe she was a little bit embarrassed that her 13-year-old daughter was writing to her asking what was going on in 1941. I can't imagine in your life. And perhaps she thought, I need to fill in these gaps for for another generation. Whatever her reason, which we don't really know, we got a treasure from her. And I really felt like she was telling the story through me, not really to me. Because at the very end of the letter, it says, and I really hope someday this story gets to be known. And so that's been the cosmic completion of this circle, is really the fact that I was able to give some voice to her story in the audiobook, which she cannot speak anymore due to dementia.
I have to correct Amy a little again, but only out of respect to her, because I do believe that really overwhelming the reason that my mother responded to Amy's letter is because it was her granddaughter. It's that simple. I don't think the timing had as much to do with it. It's true that in 1994, the same year, Schindler's List had come out. The Holocaust Museum in D.C. had opened that year. And so there was a greater awareness, but I truly believe it's because her granddaughter asked.
Well,
asked
it'll be
her.
a family debate forever.
Yeah.
So,
but I got it. Sorry, Sue.
I'm going to have to
Just
sit
one more.
between you two next time.
Just one more thing. Now, this is really important because the question is how this got to be a book. Let me explain. The difference between what my mother told me in 1978 that I used for the column and what she told Amy was, first of all, the degree of emotion and the amount of emotional involvement. And she revealed herself and her emotions about what happened to her in a way that she hadn't for me. And she had told me as a reporter the factual outline, but what she did for Amy in the letter was address it in raw emotional terms. And that's when it became apparent this needed to be a book, because she revealed herself more as a person in that. And that's what really what led to the writing of the book.
well, and that book then, so it spawned from a letter from a teenager. But Susan, I mean, in the work that you do with children's books and the age that you write to, what was it about this story that made you want to write the children's book?
Couple of things. One, that they were 12 and 14 years old. So they were the stars of the story. And I thought, kids that are that age want to read about that age. Second was, this undiscovered part of the Holocaust, this beginning of the Holocaust that nobody really knows about. The fact that an 8th grader found this story really appealed to me. And then also this stuff, painfully relevant. This Holocaust survivors are starting to die off, and there are a lot of Holocaust deniers out there. This was a survey that was done in 2020 across the 50 states and of millennials and Gen X people. So those are the young parents of today. And shocking facts, 10% believe the Jews caused the Holocaust. So it was like, what? So there's just so much misinformation out there. And I think, as Ken Burns said with his new series, you've got to tell these stories to stop this from ever happening again. So that was one reason. Then why tell the story in verse?
Oh, yes. Well, of course. I didn't know you were going to do another one. Yes. So, and why did you? I mean, this is poetry. Truly.
Yeah.
So what was the appeal?
Well, they say that Mark Twain said history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Well, that's not why. There's no rhyme really in this book, but I did do mostly in free verse, and for a couple of reasons. Lifeboat 12 was in free verse. It got a tremendous response across the country. Kids love it, and a lot of reluctant readers love it because there's so much white space, so it's not really daunting text. And also to capture the music of this story, verse seemed to be the right way to go. And I think verse is really great way to get to the emotion really quickly, but give you a buffer of all that white space to take in really hard topics. So it just seemed like the right kind of format for the book.
And Susan, just for folks who are poetry novices, free verse in the white space, that's all intentional, right? So
yes.
That's what it looks like on
That's
purpose.
what it looks like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of other poetry forms sort of sprinkled in there, according to the story and for pacing and layering and things like that, but it's mostly free verse. And also because there's a tradition of poetry for this story. So this tragedy of Baba Yar and Drabitsky Yar were both covered up by Hitler and then Stalin. So buried for decades, like nobody knew about this. And it was brought to light by a Russian poet. Yevtushenko. And so he wrote the Baba Yar poem, for which he's really famous. And then he wrote another one called The Apple Trees of Drubetsky Yar. And Shostakovich wrote his symphony based on the poem. So that's the power of the arts. You know, everybody was saying, no, this never happened, but they got the story out there. So I love that too.
And Dad, so it took Shostakovich, 5 movements in the symphony to tell a story. Was Jana's story, did it end after it got told and she came to America, and or is it an unfinished symphony?
Well, I think in many ways it was really an unfinished symphony, and something that is just sort of seeming to be finished now with something that's happening. It's something that's happening now. I just want to say briefly, it's so ironic. There's so many ironies in this story having to do with personal ironies, historical, political ironies. But one is that music saved my mother's life, but it also almost ended it, because the reason that her family ended up on the death march to Drubetsky Yar is that they didn't leave their town, Kharkiv. They had direct family members. They had uncles and aunts and cousins who implored them to leave with them when they fled east ahead of the German invasion, to go to Siberia and beyond, to get away from the Germans. They implored the Arshansky, my mother's family name, the Arshansky, to go with them. Please come with us, and they refused. Why? Because her father. Her father worshipped the German musical culture, and he had met some German soldiers during the relatively peaceful occupation of his Russian town after World War I, and they loved music. He loved music, and when they learned to play piano in a home, he ordered a Bechstein piano from Germany for them, because he so revered the German musical culture. And he said to them, the other members of the family, he said, "No, that can't be true. The Germans would never do such a thing. I know these people. We're going to be fine." And of course, they weren't. And that gets into the whole other subject of this dichotomy between human nature of good and evil. Not the subject of tonight, but as far as my mother's story being an unfinished symphony, as Aimée put it. About, I don't know when it was, Candy, correct me, a year ago, 6 months ago, as this terrible war in Ukraine was happening, we felt this desire, we felt helpless, but a desire to do something, anything we could here to somehow help. So we became involved with an organization called the Ukrainian Mothers and Children's Transport Initiative, which was started by actually Professor Michael Basler, a professor at Chapman University in California, whose own parents were Holocaust survivors, and his students, who put together a group to provide free legal advice and assistance to Ukrainians who had fled the war and wanted to come to this country. And so we started working with them in any way we could to assist them somehow. And I want to read one more thing. I just want to read to give a sense of my mother and how this is really about music, and how this will relate, you'll see, to the unfinished symphony part of this story. Is that I don't like readings because they always seem really wooden to me when I see them on C-SPAN and anywhere else. But I want to read you one thing, if I may. It's my mother's words directly. At the in Ken Burns' series, you may see, I don't know how many here have seen it, but there's a marvelous scene in part 3. And at the end of the war, when the American army has liberated one of the death camps, and there's a scene in which there are like several hundred of these survivors who are standing in front of a stage. And on that stage is a cantor that the U.S. Army had brought in to do chants with them. And it was such a touching scene. It was the first chance they had had in God knows how many years for their religion to be honored and to go through sacraments, and that reminded me of maybe my my favorite scene in Hiding in the Spotlight is my mother and her sister at the end of the war ended up in a displaced persons camp near Munich, and the last thing they did before coming to this country in 1946 was play a concert for 1,200 survivors of Dachau, just like these soldiers we saw in Burns' piece, and it was a piano recital that they played for them. And I just want to read you, this is brief, my mother's description of what it was like to play for those survivors. This program of Beethoven and Mendelssohn and others.
As he looks for that, these are her words, and so and actually throughout both books, she's directly quoted. She had such an unbelievably unique way with words, considering especially her Russian background. But these are her own words. Find it? You're gonna need this.
Yes, I will. So she says about this concert, and she says, "It was clear to me that it was probably the most inaccurate performance of my life." She said, the horror created by Hitler was defeated, but I couldn't have cared less just this one time if the performance wasn't to my standard, because it had done what we wanted, to lift humanity to goodness again, to fill the survivors of torture with signs of life and peace without fear. Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Brahms, Liszt, Schubert were all there for us. They all came together to celebrate our freedom. That's the way these composers wanted Germany and the world to be. Our mother, father, grandfather, and grandmother were there too. They came alive to listen and celebrate with us. And I felt that encompassed so much of what this story is about, how music saved their lives. And as it relates to this completion of my mother's story, when we became involved with this organization, we learned of a young man from Ukraine, who's from Kharkiv, as it turned out, my mother's hometown, or where she spent most of her childhood, whose family had fled the war to Austria. They were living in Austria, and the parents were staying in Austria, but they were hoping to get their son, Alex, 18-year-old son, to this country so that he could go to college. And so we had friends. We had a friend in California who had learned about Red Hiding in the Spotlight. She had become involved, and she had contacted this family in Ukraine, and so we made this connection. And it turned out that with her help and the help of the organization, that we were able to get this young man, to get the credentials and the legal documents and the other things he needed to come to this country. And he will actually be coming here in January, and will be enrolling at Santa Monica College with a scholarship in February. And the most amazing thing about the story is that young man, whose name is Alex Bogansha, is the great-grandson of the same family that sheltered my mother and her sister for 2 weeks in Kharkiv during the war, and enabled them to escape the Nazis and come to this country, and so that's sort of the ultimate coming. Yep. The ultimate full circle element of this story, and how that the symphony of her life finally, I think, found its final movement in us being able to help this Bogansha family, the same one that helped her. So
it's a story of small miracles, and a lot of it fueled by humanity. So yeah, thank you for that ending. And this is Alex here, and then this is the organization should you wish to become interested in that and explore it. We did not do a good job with brevity. No. And so this is, like I said, it was our first time as a trio up here. Thank you all for being such a wonderful, receptive audience. And I've been told too that we can stay for as long as you guys do want to have questions or dialogue, that nobody's getting kicked out. So let us open for questions, comments, anything. The microphone is hiding behind this little pole here. If you're interested in walking up, hiding out of the spotlight. If you'd like to walk up there and ask a question, but frankly, I bet we could probably hear you if you had an interest in raising your hand and a comment or question from anybody, please. So, yes. Oh, we can do a handheld. Excellent. Oh, brilliant. There you go.
I'm sorry that I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say something you shared was really touching, and that was that I've really struggled with my own family's warmth towards German people that they knew and had personal relationships with, despite things that happened to them as part of what happened in Nazi Germany. And so you sharing that piece of the family story and thinking that it couldn't happen, there's just, it's helpful because it's really confusing sometimes to think about my family's history. So I just really appreciated that.
Thank you.
It is because you can be rational about your thoughts and ideas, but the emotions are something that it's another matter, isn't it? And I imagine you've had people tell you, just try to make that distinction between them and the other, and it's not that easy, is it? Yeah.
Other questions, comments? Yes. Would you like here? Let's let you have a microphone as well.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. And could you tell us your name?
Julia.
Hi, Julia.
So I was wondering, in the video, it said that you said that she had to pick a birthday. Which birthday did she pick?
Great question.
That's such a good question. She chose, which one do you think?
Yeah, which one do you think she chose?
Okay.
Yeah.
There are benefits of both.
She chose April 1st, and she chose April 1st because it's the truth. It's the truth, and ultimately, that's what this story is all about, is telling the truth. And so she did choose April 1st. I can tell you that she'd been here in this country so long with the old birthday that she changed it for us, our family. We celebrated on April 1st now, but all her legal documents, the Social Security and all that, it's still December 25th because it's way too much trouble to change that stuff. But no, it was, she did change April 1st. What a really good question, Julia, because, as we're told, as journalists, never assume anything. And you didn't. So maybe your journalism is in your future,
There you go.
Thank you, Julia. And question here? Can
Hi,
you tell us your name?
Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
It's so beautiful to see you here. Thank you for sharing this and creating it. I'm curious what happened to Zava's sister, and is there any information on her experience that's come into this project?
You can answer that one.
Yeah. I'm really, thank you. I'm really glad you asked that question, because I've got to tell you, in most of our presentations that we make, really the first question is usually, how did Frina escape? I won't describe how my mother escaped exactly, but the question is, how do we know? How did she escape? And the answer is, I don't know. And the reason I don't know is that when I decided to do the book, of course, I interviewed my mother. And of course, I then approached Frina and said, Frina, I'm doing this book. Could I come up and talk to you? She lived in Buffalo, and she declined. And so I was kind of surprised, because this is her story too. And moreover, two people have exactly the same experience. Many years later, they will remember it differently. So there were things about the story that Frina might have been able to correct or add or illuminate. So it was very important. So I tried again another time a while later, a few weeks later. And this time I got a letter from her husband basically saying, Frina's very upset that you would ask her to do this. She considers those moments with her parents private memories. Please don't ask again. And so I respected that. So I never spoke to Frina. The only person who knows exactly what happened to Frina, how she escaped, is her husband. And of course, he was not divulging that either. So we just don't know. The book, Hiding in the Spotlight, we really don't. We do know that they were together for most of the. They were together for the entire war, so they had that same experience. Frina was a very different personality from my mother. I think that my armchair psychology belief is that Frina was born with a much more fragile psyche. I always used to say my mother was born with a steel-belted psyche. Amazing. Frina was much more delicate that way. I think she suffered more trauma from the war. And it was very difficult for her as life went on, as she became older. And it's just clearly, to use it's cliche, but the word trauma, I think she was more traumatized. Although she went on to have a wonderful career as a pianist, as a teacher, even as an administrator, but still, going back to, forgive me, I think it's your name, Jessica, your question, your comment was that all those things can be true, but the emotions rule. And there's something that happened to Frina, I'm convinced, during the war that damaged her to a degree that it never did my mother. So that's just armchair psychology stuff, but that's my feeling.
And also, when I was writing Alias Anna, of course, I wanted to know Frina's story too. And so I contacted Greg, and Craig was always so, wonderful with all my questions and long responses and everything. I got the response back. So I said, could I interview the sons? And the response came back, heck no. It's like, okay, never mind.
It is too bad. I mean, and the last thing on this, my understanding is that they had kind of an off and on relationship, the sisters, throughout the rest of their life. It was a little tumultuous. I mean, they had very different experiences. So we don't really. Well, they did reconcile,
true,
and
true. Yeah. I mean, even more to tell the truth, not just on and off, but basically they were basically estranged for the last 25 years of Frina's life. Frina died 5 or 6 years ago. She had dementia, and but they were estranged for at least 25 years, which is tragic for all the reasons you can imagine. They made it all that way through this terrible war to find themselves estranged at that point. It was very tragic. But
next question, your name, please.
Brian, thank you very much. It was great. Maybe this isn't the central part of the story, but I'm a linear guy. In the movie, I saw this Captain Dawson who booked a trip for somebody on a boat, and then we never hear from him again. I don't know if that's related. I'm assuming there was something else that happened that continued that relationship, which seems extraordinary too.
Yes, well, I want to start with this because I think, first of all, yes, Lieutenant in the U.S. Army, Larry Dawson, I find to be one of the most captivating characters of this story. This guy hears Zhanna and Frina play in a refugee camp.
He's the head of
the refugee camp. Yes,
camp.
And he says, you got to come to the United States. My brother, David Dawson, goes to this place called the Juilliard. And she's like, the what? And he got the girls on the first ship of Ukrainian refugees to the United States and brought them into his family's home here in Charlottesville, Virginia. And that farm, that house, that family, we got to reconnect with in the discovery of this story. And the Dawson name is indeed from that. It was because Jana ended up marrying Larry's brother, David, the musician at Juilliard, and where Jana ended up getting enrolled as a late teenager as well. So
that was so much better than I would have done. That old sign, if you lived here, you'd be home by now. I'd still be talking at this point. So that was so good. Anyway, that's exactly the story. And the girls,
you're done. No.
The girls, and Larry brought them. Larry loved music. He couldn't play a note. His brother, my dad, was a violin prodigy from Charlottesville. But anyway, Larry brought them, and he was determined to get them into Juilliard. Well, it's hard to get into Juilliard. And so he brought them to this country, and he practiced them up, and they went to the Peabody Institute Conservatory. They were offered a full scholarship there. They were ecstatic, and they walked out. Larry said, okay, that's fine. Now we're going to Juilliard. So they went to Juilliard, and they auditioned, and they both were given full scholarships to Juilliard. But Larry Dawson, yes, my uncle, quite captivating. It was hard for me not to comment when this picture came on the screen because that would have extended it. But that's yes.
Hi, next question. What's your name?
I'm
Candy Dawson.
Candy. Oh, another Dawson.
Another
Yes,
Dawson.
the filmmaker. Yes.
And I know they're part of the story, and I, as a mother, I must compliment Aimée, not just as a mother, but she really did a wonderful job on the narration of the audiobook. She had never done this before, but it comes full circle. And Jana is 95, and she has dementia. And so she couldn't read the book. Alias Anna is so special. And the poetry in it, the way Susan has done it is just remarkable. And so Aimée is now her voice of hearing Jana listens to Aimée read the story of Alias Anna. And so when we were just there recently, that's when we saw her smile, and she recognizes her granddaughter's voice and her story. But Susan, I wanted to ask you, you've done some presentations for schools and students. I'm just wondering what you're finding as I know Lifeboat was amazingly taken in by middle grade students. What are you finding as the opinion of tweens right now for Alias Anna?
Well, to tell you the truth, I've just started going back into in-person visits. I've been doing Zoom visits, so it's all still to come. So I haven't really been doing that many lately, but spring is usually the big time to go for school visits.
Well, the same with us. Of course, we want to go to the middle school where Aimée had that project to write the letter and to speak to that group of students about how important it is just to ask the questions. So many people that are my age have not asked the questions, and then their parents have passed away. And I also just wanted to tell you the UMAC, the Ukrainian Mothers and Children Transport, I have some cards here that I'd love to pass out. Anybody that wants to donate in any way to this organization, it's just become an amazing vehicle for not only legal help, but Alex Bagancha, we found a sponsor for him just because somebody went to this website and then they read about it. And you know, the Nextdoor app, the neighborhood app, somebody just put on there, is anybody out here in California close to Santa Monica College able to maybe sponsor this young man and have him live with you? And somebody from Nextdoor said, I can do it. So that's wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, we can take one more.
Yes.
My name is Marjorie. I just wanted to thank, I do have a question. I wanted to thank you for your work and this incredible presentation. It's not a simple story. It's very complex. And I don't know if you know this, I was an advisor to the founding director of the Holocaust Museum here years ago. So the questions that we dealt with, the very essential questions: at what age children should be exposed to the Holocaust, are oral accounts, first-person accounts, are they really authentic history? Can we count on that? All of these questions that we dealt with then are questions that you raised this evening. I don't know if you know that or are aware of it, but it's really incredible, the in-depth research and work and thinking that you have done. My question is, have you been in touch with the Holocaust Museum, and have you intersected with them? I know there's a whole story on Babi Yar and all of that, and also Facing History and Ourselves, which is an amazing organization. Do you know about them? And Boston based, but they have chapters all over the country.
Yeah, we are going to be speaking at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City on December 11th. So that's the next thing I think up. And
we've been to the museum and actually had a book signing at the museum, but it was no presentation of any kind. I have to say that doing my research, I skipped over this because it's basically, I think, implicit. But as somebody who was not a Holocaust scholar of any kind growing up, so much of what you read in the book and the following book I did called Judgment Before Nuremberg leans on the real scholarship of the great Holocaust scholars, starting with Raoul Hilberg among above all others, who wrote the Extermination of the European Jewish. And so, but since you're talking about history, just briefly, I want to say, because going to give you something, a piece of information. I'm almost 100% guaranteed you can win a bar bet with this, okay? Because based on the reaction I've had, what I've found in making presentations, Judgment Before Nuremberg is really a story that revolves around the first trial of Germans for their crimes during the Holocaust. I grew up, almost everybody in this country seems to have grown up thinking that those first trials were held at Nuremberg after the war. And those were very important trials. But as we discovered in our trip to Kharkiv in 2006, went into a small museum and found a photo display of actually the first trial of 3 German officers and a Russian collaborator that was held in December of 1943, more than a year and a half before the end of the war. And it was there was a trial. It was conducted by the Soviets, and all these defendants were convicted, and they were hung in a public square before 40 or 50,000 people in the city. And this was actually front page news in this country. When I researched for the book, I went and I found countless newspapers across this country, big and small, from New York to Chicago to little cities across America, that had this on the front page. It was regarded as a very important thing, and a trial. And it led to it set an important legal precedence for the Nuremberg trials after the war. Very important. And so it was. If you ask, again, I almost guarantee you, if you ask somebody, make a bet, can you tell me when and where the first trial of Germans was conducted for their crimes? I'd be shocked if you would lose that bet, I can say. But again, not to trivialize it, because there is it symbolizes this whole body of history about Ukraine that's really still largely unknown.
And to address your other comments, yes, let's talk. Any last questions? I think, oh yes, please. Margaret, is that okay? The timing. The last question. Did you hear that? Last question.
I'm accustomed to getting up to the mic there behind the pillar, because I'm a veteran of P&P talks. Just wanted you to comment on Ken Burns' The Holocaust. Critique Ken Burns' The Holocaust. Positive or negative? Briefly.
Very briefly. I guess.
Yeah. I don't.
Okay. Okay. Very briefly. Overwhelmingly positive. I mean, Ken Burns it's wonderful, typical Ken Burns work. We watched, Candy and I had a chance to watch all 3 before this session, and we felt the first and the second are marvelous. He personalizes, as he always has, history in important ways, so that you can follow the history is embodied in the stories of these individuals that he follows through the episodes. The third, and it's mostly the emphasis, the theme, as you probably know, of his series is about the American failure to respond to what was happening, and part of that failure was cowardice, or on the part of American government officials. Some of it was based on a great deal of anti-Semitism that was alive in this country at the time. Large pockets of anti-Semitism, and it was. I knew this, I'd heard this, but he really dramatizes it in a very shocking way. The third episode in particular, the last one, please don't miss that one. It's climactic in the truest sense of the word. And it's just very, very, very powerful stuff, and it's still happening today. Very briefly, there's one anecdote in the series is about how the State Department was dilatory and hesitated to act. In many cases, didn't ever act. And one of the people responsible for that was a man named John McCloy, who was in the State Department. And the interesting thing that struck a bell for me, and I looked in my book, Judgment Before Nuremberg, and found that McCloy was also an American and the head of the American military in Germany after the war. And after the war, there were 14. The final the final prosecutions at Nuremberg were of the Einsatzgruppen killers who went through Ukraine and killed most of these 1 million people. Ironic, because they were the last ones to be prosecuted. 14 men, 14 commanders were convicted of murder, and 4 were executed, but the rest of them were released by 1958 by the U.S. government. They released these convicted these Nazi murderers, because they were worried about, they were more worried about communism and nurturing their new relationship with the new West German government. So that was shocking to me. We're looking the other way, and even today, you know the story today with what's happening with the resurgence of anti-Semitism in this country. I mean, are we ever going to learn not to just stand by? And so yeah. But the Burns thing, the Burns series, absolutely tremendous. Again, the first and the second episodes are very, very good. The third is absolutely magnificent. So.
All right.
No,
do you want to?
No, that's
Please.
That's fine.
No, thank you, Aimée, Greg, and Susan. This has been so impactful for all of us here. I wish we could talk, all evening. We do have to close the store, but we want to have time for the book signing too. So please, let's give a round of applause for this amazing presentation.